Hello, welcome to Read. Tonight, I wanted to talk about Zadie Smith's White Teeth. You might notice that the lighting is a little bit different. I usually film during the day, but I'm actually refilming this video because I had done a complete video on White Teeth, but I just realized after editing it that I missed out on a lot of things. I rambled a little bit, and I actually did a bit more research in the subsequent days, and so I just wanted to refilm the video and have it a little bit more concise, I guess, and touch over all the things without it being, too long. But I am talking about Zadie Smith's White Teeth. It is the first book that I've read by Zadie Smith, and what I'm going to do, as with my usual structure, I'll give a brief overview, and then I'll talk about extracts from the book that I can riff off of and go down tangents. I'm going to talk about the genre, which is hysterical fiction, and my sort of opinions or thoughts on that. I'll talk about the book's structure, general characters, and plot, but then I'll just jump straight into it because I have a lot of extracts, and this book is was thoroughly interesting and enjoyable to me. But to start with hysterical fiction, so I actually found out about White Teeth because I had read Gravity's Rainbow, I'd read David Foster Wallace' Infinite Jest, and while looking up those books, I realized that they were sort of under the genre of hysterical fiction, and I was like, oh wow, this is really interesting. I clicked on it and I saw a whole bunch of names and books that I liked, and I thought, great, a convenient genre for me to find new books. And I think other authors like DeLillo and Salman Rushdie are on there, but that was how I saw Zadie Smith's White Teeth. Saw it in the store and I was just like, okay, yeah, I'll buy it. Sounds like it'll be a good read. It wasn't until after reading White Teeth that I realized that the term hysterical fiction was actually coined in a pretty disparaging review of this by the critic James Wood, where he talked about how it sort of felt like, in the wake of people like Pynchon and Wallace and DeLillo, a new sort of genre of novel was emerging, one that sort of almost bloated the book with details, and it became a book that wanted to, quote, know 1,000 or 1,000,000 things but not know a single person. And before I dive into my thoughts about that, I'm not a professional critic. I'm not in any way qualified. I do have the link to the review itself in the description, and so please go and check that out and make your own opinions of it. But reading it, it was funny because all of the things that he was describing, he was talking about how these novels pursue vitality at all cost, and I can definitely see that coming out of a tradition of things like Ulysses, where I think someone said about James Joyce that he doesn't write books about things, the books are the thing. And then you really get that with things like Gravity's Rainbow as well. I thought that White Teeth was actually an interesting book. I thought that it was funny that this was the book that broke the camel's back and made him and made Wood decide that there was a new genre. It put a slightly sour taste in my mouth because it felt like he almost was waiting for a imperfect version of the novel to come out in the form of White Teeth, and then he sort of used White Teeth to punch up at Wallace, Pynchon, DeLillo, as opposed to just sort of calling them out. But, there are definitely very real criticisms that he has, but I don't really think that the criticisms that he has for hysterical fiction, which, of course, the title or the name refers to, or it seems to refer to, a hysterical pregnancy, like something that has all of the semblance of being a pregnancy and having human life, but lacking the crucial thing, the human inside. It was funny that I agreed with him that a lot of the points and a lot of the things he didn't like do show up in those other novels, but I don't think it showed up so much in White Teeth. I felt instead like Zadie Smith used the sort of prose in that shows up in those sort of books as a way to seduce the reader into becoming interested in the characters. So in the same way that, Wallace uses his style to seduce you into reading and wanting to reread the book, and especially in the way that he structured the book, I felt like because White Teeth doesn't have a MacGuffin, or it doesn't have any, it doesn't have the videotape Infinite Jest or the Quintuple Zero rocket, really the thing that you need to become invested in are the characters, because the plot is just the characters' lives. There's no real end goal. There are some things, but the plot is just how the characters interact. And so I think that Smith kind of knew that she needed to have readers really invested in them, and so she makes it really funny. She uses these sort of absurd comedic details that really draw you into the book, and you will really like, and you will really sort of you'll probably realize that you're being seduced in this way, but if you happen to already like books that are now retroactively classified as hysterical fiction, I think this will be great because it feels even more character focused than your other Pynchon novels. But nevertheless, go and read the review anyway, because it is interesting. It did sort of sour it for me when he starts to talk about how, like if you take a look in Dickens, there's real characters and there are real touching, intimate moments. And I always get a bit of a bad taste in my mouth whenever I hear people talking about how, books in the past did it well and all of this modern stuff is just, not doing it well, but really it's just different because all those books exist. But anyway, moving on. Go read the review because it is interesting. We'll talk about the book structure. The book is in 4 parts, and each part focuses on some main characters. So we start with Archie, and then the second part is Samad. Archie and Samad are friends. They fought in World War II together. There's a kind of funny interaction, but both of them end up moving back to London. They become friends. They each get married to women who are considerably younger than them. Archie gets married to Clara, and they have a child. And Samad gets married to Alsana. It's actually an arranged marriage, and they have 2 kids. They have 2 twins. Archie and Clara's daughter is Irie, and she is our protagonist for part 3. And Maggot and Millet are the twins, and they, along with Marcus, who is a Chalfin, who I'll get to, are the protagonists or the central characters of part 4. And then really, so they all become friends, they all become intertwined, and the plot will sort of be revealed as it goes on. But what I wanted to talk about that I love about this book is that the book it seems to be about 2 things, if anything. It's about a lot of things, but in terms of the 2 takeaways, it's about first generation immigrants worrying about losing their culture when they move overseas, and not just themselves but also with their kids. There are some sections where they talk about how their kids are more British than British because despite being in England, they're also kind of fighting back against their parents' ideology, so they're overcompensating, and that's a really interesting image. But the second part of the book, and this is so fascinating because Smith plants a lot of seeds for this early on, is what are the little things that happen in a person's life that lead them to fundamentalist or extremist ideas? And I think Smith executes on the development really, really, really well, and really impressively makes you sympathize with every single character who is in this extremist mind frame. The criticisms that I have with the book, really the only 2 criticisms is just that I wasn't a big fan of the ending. I think it was a little bit it just sort of deflated. It didn't have the I just wasn't a massive fan of it. It wasn't bad. It was a bit underwhelming. But maybe there's 2 reasons for this. One is something that Rushdie talk about, Salman Rushdie, where he talks about how risky it is to write up until present day, because you don't really know what's going to happen. You don't know if your book's going to be dated. This was released in 2000, and a kind of central event. the book actually sort of goes up until 1999 New Year's Eve. Even though the really big event is 1992 New Year's Eve, it does sort of go back and forth. So Smith really was writing up until like present day, which is kind of ballsy, you know. But another reason why I think it's, after thinking about it, it's maybe a little bit more understandable why the book is it's not very conclusive, is because the problem or the experience of being an immigrant in England is not conclusive. It's not been solved. That is a little bit of a stretch. Like, you won't feel that in the moment. I won't say it's a stretch. You won't feel it in the moment, but the more you think about the book and the more it sits with you, the more acceptable that justification became for me. But really, actually the other thing is that the book is called White Teeth, and teeth imagery do come up a lot, but I don't think it's really as strong. I don't know if it needed to be like the guiding metaphor that comes up in all places. There are interesting things like talking about our roots and how some criticisms that are put to Samad, who is trying to be a devout Muslim, is that a lot of the problems in decay with teeth actually sort of start in the roots and in the gums. But overall, I felt that it was more just kind of funny or quirky whenever a teeth imagery showed up, and it wasn't really like it wasn't a very strong guiding image for me. But those are really the only two things I didn't like about the book. I'm going to start jumping into some of the things I really, really love. So, jumping back to Archie Jones, who is the father of Irie, and he's an interesting character. The story is, the book is very funny in that it starts in him failing in an attempted suicide by, trying to gas himself in a car. He ends up parking outside of a Muslim butcher, and the guy comes out and is like, you can't kill here, we're not licensed. If you're halal, we have to thoroughly bleed you first. And it's very funny. But later on, Smith writes this, sort of establishing Archie's idea or his vibe. He's a very indecisive person, and a common thing that comes up is that he finds it really hard to make decisions, and he always has to flip a coin. He decided to kill himself based off a coin flip and was resolved to carry it out. And then it said, after the man Mo came and saved him, who actually comes up at the end, which I really loved, is Smith writes this. It occurred to Archie that for the first time since his birth, life had said yes to Archie Jones. Not simply an okay or you might as well carry on since you've started, but a resounding affirmative. Life wanted Archie. She had jealously grabbed him from the jaws of death back to her bosom. Although he was not one of her better specimens, life wanted Archie, and Archie, much to his own surprise, wanted life. And so... it's kind of starting up talking about Smith's voice. She has a really lovely style, a very she's got a great prose style that I really like. I learned later, I got big Pinchon vibes. I really love the sort of, she has some slapstick humor in there, and some that I will sort of get to. And so I got Pinchon vibes while I was reading it, but apparently she was really influenced by an author, P.G. Wodehouse, who I haven't read, so I can't compare, but it seems like it'd be the sort of vibe if it's like this. So there's a kind of funny joke in books like this, especially books like Infinite Jest as well, where because of the style of the book, the author is often at the liberty to just plop down a random inserted essay. And usually in this book, they're all really, really good. This is an essay and it starts to plant the seed really early on of extremists or fundamentalists justifying the world to themselves. So Clara, who ends up marrying Archie, has just been in an accident with a boyfriend of hers. She has bumped into it. They landed in a tree. The bike died. Ryan was hurled away one way, Clara the other. And then Smith writes this. The principles of Christianity and Sod's Law, also known as Murphy's Law, are the same. Everything happens to me for me. So if a man drops a piece of toast and it lands butter side down, this unlucky event is interpreted as being proof of an essential truth about bad luck. That the toast fell as it did just to prove to you, Mr. Unlucky, that there is a defining force in the universe and it is bad luck. It's not random. It could never have fallen on the right side, so the argument goes, because that's Sod's Law. In short, Sod's Law happens to you to prove to you that there is Sod's Law. Yet, unlike gravity, it is a law that does not exist whatever happens. When the toast lands on the right side, Sod's Law mysteriously disappears. Likewise, when Clara fell, knocking the teeth out of the top of her mouth, while Ryan stood up without a scratch, Ryan knew it was because God had chosen Ryan as one of the saved and Clara as one of the unsaved. Not because one was wearing a helmet and the other wasn't. And had it happened the other way around, had gravity reclaimed Ryan's teeth and sent them rolling down Primrose Hill like tiny enamel snowballs, well, you can bet your life that God, in Ryan's mind, would have done a vanishing act. And so just for some context that I realized I forgot to mention, Clara's mother, Hortense, is a Jehovah's Witness. She's been trying to convince, and her and Ryan, so Ryan is Clara's love interest at this point, have been trying to convince Clara. So that's sort of what Smith is touching on in that phrase. A really, really kind of pithy insight. Another thing I love that Smith talks about is she manages to actually meld the working class experience with that of being an immigrant. It's definitely no secret that a lot of people who come from overseas who are very qualified are unable to get jobs overseas that match their qualifications. Samad, for example, is a scientist, but he has to work as a waiter. And in talking about him in context in the restaurant, Smith writes this: "And that's what it was like most nights. Abuse from Shiva and others, condescension from Ardashir, never seeing Alsana, Samad's wife, never seeing the sun, clutching 15 pence and then releasing it, wanting desperately to be wearing a sign, a large white placard that said, 'I am not a waiter, I have been a student, a scientist, a soldier. My wife is called Alsana, we live in East London, but we would like to move north. I am a Muslim, but Allah has forsaken me, and I have forsaken Allah. I'm not sure. I have a friend, Archie, and others. I'm 49, but women still turn in the street, sometimes.' But no such placard existed. He had instead the urge, the need, to speak to every man and, like the ancient mariner, explain constantly wanting to reassert something, anything. Wasn't that important? But then the heartbreaking disappointment, to find out that the inclining of one's head, poising of one's pen, these were important, so important. It was important to be a good waiter, to listen when someone said, 'Lamb dawn sock with rice and chips, thank you.' And 15 pence clinked on the china. 'Thank you, sir. Thank you so very much.'" Oh, beautiful, beautiful writing. Melding those two together, I definitely want to read more about sort of the working class and just, being someone who's, worked in customer service for like more than a decade. I've definitely kind of wanted to be compelled to write about it myself, but Smith does such a great job. Another somewhat inserted essay, or not really, talking about the difference. One of the key things that links Alsana, Samad's wife, and Clara, Archie's wife, is that they both married older men, and Alsana is sort of meditating on the fact that not all problems in these relationships can be solved just by talking. Who her niece of shame is sort of berating her for not talking with Samad. But I cannot be worrying all the time about the truth. I have to worry about the truth that can be lived with, and that is the difference between losing your marbles drinking the salty sea or swallowing the stuff from the streams. My niece of shame believes in the talking cure, says Alsana with something of a grin. Talk, and it will be better. Be honest, slice open your heart and spread the red stuff around. But the past is made of more than words, dearie. We married old men, you see. These bumps, Alsana pats them both, they will always have daddy long legs for fathers. One leg in the present, one in the past. No talking will change this. Their roots will always be tangled, and roots get dug up. Just look at my garden, birds at the coriander, and Zadie's just sort of bringing it back to present moment, making it seem a bit less diatribe-y. And she succeeds, in my opinion. one of the plot points and one of the inciting incidents is that Samad and Alsana don't have a very physically intimate relationship, and Samad starts to become involved in an affair with their kids' school music teacher, and however, at first, before the affair starts, he just becomes very attracted, and he basically starts masturbating like the world was about to end. And so I'll read more than what I highlighted because just the whole thing is funny. So, masturbation recommenced in earnest. Those 2 months between seeing the pretty red-haired music teacher once and seeing her again were the longest, stickiest, smelliest, guiltiest 56 days of Samad's life. Wherever he was, whatever he was doing, he found himself suddenly accosted by some kind of synesthetic fixation with the woman, hearing the color of her hair in the mosque, smelling the touch of her hand on the tube, tasting her smile while innocently walking the streets on his way to work. And this in turn led to a knowledge of every public convenience in London, led to the kind of masturbation that even a 15-year-old boy living in the Shetlands might find excessive. His only comfort was that he, like Roosevelt, had made a new deal. He was going to beat, but he wasn't going to eat, talking about fasting and breaking the Ramadan. He meant somehow to purge himself of the sights and smells of Poppy Burt-Jones, the music teacher, of the sin of istimna, masturbation, one of the things that breaks fast. And though it wasn't fasting season and these were the longest days of the year, still no substance passed Samad's lips between sunrise and sunset, not even, thanks to a little China spittoon, his own saliva. And because there was no food going in one end, what came out of the other was so thin and so negligible, so meager and translucent, that Samad could almost convince himself that the sin was lessened, that one wonderful day, he would be able to massage one-eyed Jack as vigorously as he liked, and nothing would come out but air. And so another thing starting to introduce this idea of kids losing, second generation losing their culture. At school, because she thinks it's a bit of a novelty, Miss Poppy Burt-Jones, the affairess, the music teacher, talks about, you know, maybe we can learn some things from other people's culture. Let's play some Indian music, and the kids have this kind of this hurrah. They start to make fun of it, but then the teacher asks Maggot and Millet who their favorite teachers are, who their favorite musicians are, and they say Bruce Springsteen and Michael Jackson, and so Samad is sort of like, he's obviously just feeling his usual bemoanments, but even Miss Poppy Burt-Jones, she's a little bit like, she's a little bit taken aback because they're so engrossed in the Western culture. And this is one of those times, or one of the few times where Smith, she puts in another inserted essay. This is one that's criticizing tradition, and it's pretty just definitely focused at Samad. But she writes this: if religion is the opium of the people, tradition is an even more sinister analgesic, simply because it rarely appears sinister. If religion is a tight band, a throbbing vein and a needle, tradition is a far homelier concoction, poppy seeds ground into tea, a sweet cocoa drink laced with cocaine, the kind of thing your grandmother might have made. To Samad, as to the people of Thailand, tradition was culture, and culture led to roots, and these were good, these were untainted principles. That didn't mean he could live by them, abide by them, or grow in the manner they demanded, but roots were roots and roots were good. You could get nowhere telling him that weeds too have tubers, or that the first sign of loose teeth is something rotten, something degenerate deep within the gums. Roots were what saved, the ropes one throws out to rescue drowning men, to save their souls. And the further Samad himself floated out of the sea, pulled down to the depths by the siren named Poppy Burt-Jones, the more determined he became to create for his boys roots on shore, deep roots that no storm or gale could displace. So this is some of the early stages when Smith introduces a radical and a kind of response radicalization of Samad, trying to get his kids desperately to keep them as sort of devout Muslims because he knows that they're not going to maintain their culture, along with criticizing the fact that Samad himself is not even really a great role model. His kids see him drinking, see him smoking, and another thing that, whether it makes a big impact on them or not, the kids see him having the affair. They know that they know about the infidelity. Another long but excellent inserted essay. This is the start, and it's putting us into Alsana's mind. To Alsana's mind, the real difference between people was not colour, nor did it lie in gender, faith, their relative ability to dance to a syncopated rhythm, or open their fists to reveal a handful of gold coins. The real difference was far more fundamental. It was in the earth, it was in the sky. You could divide the whole of humanity into two distinct camps as far as she was concerned, simply by asking them to complete a very simple questionnaire. A. Are the skies you sleep under likely to open up for weeks on end? B. Is the ground you walk on likely to tremble and split? C. Is there a chance that the ominous mountain casting a midday shadow over your home might one day erupt with no rhyme or reason? Because if the answer is yes to one or all of these questions, then the life you lead is a midnight thing, always a hair's breadth from the witching hour. It is volatile, it is threadbare, it is carefree in the true sense of that term. It is light, losable like a keyring or hair clip, and it is lethargy. Why not sit all morning, all day, all year, under the same cypress tree, drawing the figure of 8 in the dust? More than that, it is disaster, it is chaos. Why not overthrow a government on a whim? Why not blind the man you hated? Why not go mad, go gibbering through the town like a loon, waving your hands, tearing your hair? There's nothing to stop you, or rather anything could stop you, any hour, any minute. That feeling, that's the real difference in life. People who live on solid ground underneath safe skies know nothing of this. They are like the English POWs in Dresden who continued to pour tea and dress for dinner even as the alarms went off, even as the city became a towering ball of fire. Born of a green and pleasant land, a temperate land, the English have a basic inability to conceive of disaster even when it is man-made. So yeah, like I can get that to some degree. You might not like the preachy nature because it is really just a like thwap. It is a tell-not show. But Smith also tells really well, and like the stuff that she's telling is quite excellent. So in that sense, it's a lot more digestible and you might enjoy it. Okay, so now it's about time that I talk about the big plot point. So talking about Samad wanting his sons to be good Muslims, he decides that he wants to send them back to Bangladesh to become, to get more in touch with their culture, to not kind of get the English influence, but being immigrants, being strapped for money, he very quickly realizes that he can't send them both back. He has to send only one back. He can't decide who to send back. Does he send back Magid, who is a more like proper, smart, kind of attentive, good boy, who is the most likely to take advantage of this? Or does he send back Millet, who is already becoming a bit of a troublemaker and is in need, as far as Samad is concerned, of more discipline and of like going towards this ideal? In the end, he ends up choosing to send Magid back, and a really powerful image, and I've never come across this before. I love that Smith put this in, is that Samad the only people that he knew that knew about this plan was Archie and was Poppy Burt-Jones, the woman he was having an affair with whom he was having an affair. And after finding out, I'll quote, after Alsana found out. Alsana had decided to stop speaking directly to her husband. Through the next 8 years, she would determine never to say yes to him, never to say no to him, but rather to force him to live like she did, never knowing, never being sure, holding Samad's sanity to ransom, until she was paid in full with the return of her number one son eldest by 2 minutes, until she could once more put a chubby hand through his thick hair. That was her promise, that was her curse upon Samad, and it was exquisite revenge. At times, it very nearly drove him to the brink, to the kitchen knife stage, to the medicine cabinet, but Samad was the kind of person too stubborn to kill himself if it meant giving someone else satisfaction. He hung on in there, Alsana turning over in her sleep, muttering, "Just bring him back, Mr. Idiot. If it's driving you nuts so, just bring my baby back." But there was no money to bring Maggot back, even if Samad had been inclined to wave the white dotty, which I think is like a white flag, like a surrender thing. He learnt versus learned? Oh, interesting. He learned to live with it. It got to the point where if somebody said yes or no to Samad in the street or in the restaurant, he hardly knew how to respond. He would come to forget what those two elegant little signifiers meant. He never heard them from Alsana's lips. Whatever the question in the Iqbal house might be, there would never again be a straight answer. Alsana, have you seen my slippers? Possibly, Samad Mia. What time is it? It could be 3, Samad Mia, but Allah knows it could also be 4. Alsana, where have you put the remote control? It is as likely to be in the drawer, Samad Mia, as it is behind the sofa. And so it went. So there's a section actually in this same chapter called Mutiny where it focuses on 3 specific days. The first is, or 3 important days in history. There was one that was sort of like a great hurricane or a great cyclone. The later one is the families watching the Berlin Wall fall on TV. But the one I want to talk about is that the Bradford book burnings of Salman Rushdie's The Satanic Verses, which obviously had a very big impact on Smith, and she decided not only to include it, but to have our main character's son, Millet, the troublemaker, actually participate in it, and we see him going to it. And they're talking about how, they got to get rid of this book, I'd fuck him up, yeah, if he was there, dirty fucking book, it's a fucking insult. And then they all talk about how, well, have you actually read it? But it's, and to her credit, Smith does an amazing job at making you empathize. So let me just read a section that's talking about what drew Millet to wanting to participate in these Bradford book burnings. He knew that he, Millet, was a Paki no matter where he came from, that he smelt of curry, had no sexual identity, took other people's jobs or had no job and bummed off the state, or gave all the jobs to his relatives, that he could be a dentist or a shop owner or a curry shifter, but not a footballer or a filmmaker, that he should go back to his own country or stay here and earn his bloody keep, that he worshipped elephants and wore turbans, that no one who looked like Millet or spoke like Millet or felt like Millet was ever on the news unless they had recently been murdered. In short, he knew that he had no face in this country, no voice in this country, until the week before last, when suddenly people like Millet were on every channel and every radio and every newspaper, and they were angry, and Millet recognized the anger, thought it recognized him, and grabbed it with both hands. And so after Alsana and the family see Millet on TV doing this book burning, Alsana decides to get some justice. When Millet came home that evening, a great bonfire was raging in the back garden. All his secular stuff, 4 years worth of the cool pre and post Ragastani, every album, every poster, special edition t-shirts, club flyers collected and preserved over 2 years, beautiful Air Max trainers, copies 20 to 75 of 200 AD magazine, etc., The Catcher in the Rye, his guitar, Godfather 1 and 2, all had been placed on the funeral pyre, now a smouldering mount of ashes that was giving off fumes of plastic and paper, stinging the boy's eyes that were already filled with tears. Everyone has to be taught a lesson, Alsana had said, lighting the match with a heavy heart some hours earlier. Either everything is sacred or nothing is, and if he starts burning other people's things, then he loses something sacred also. Everyone gets what's coming sooner or later. Which you can see why that would be like, oh yeah, power move, what a queen. But it also comes back to bite her in the ass because it establishes that Millet has no place at home. He can't do anything. He can't do anything right. All of his things are sort of, he's not finding a place. He lashes out. He sees these people, and then he tries to do something that he believes is good or is right. And then he comes home, and all of his identity is sort of destroyed. And it's, yeah, like you will read that straight away and you'll be like, God, Alsana is such a boss bitch. But then as the book goes on and you really start to be in Millet's mind when he joins these fundamentalist groups, you start to realize that it's not as easy as just getting those sort of petty victories. I think Smith outlines that so well. Okay, our third part of the book, halfway through basically, is when we start to focus on Irie. And our first chapter, The Miseducation of Irie Jones, Smith spends a lot of time really establishing this kind of dysmorphia and this discomfort with Irie not having the ideal body shape. She is a big girl, and sort of the insecurities that the Western ideal and the standard are placing on her. And then she kind of in the same class, in the same setting, in the same scene rather, really expertly sort of introduces that as far as Western literature goes, in terms of Shakespeare, the concept of a black woman being beautiful is incorrect. So first I will read a description. Puberty, real full-blown puberty, had separated these old friends, Irie Jones and Millet Iqbal. Different sides of the school fence. Irie believed she had been dealt the dodgy cards, mountainous curves, buck teeth, and thick metal retainer, impossible afro hair, and to top it off, mole-ish eyesight, which in turn required bottle-top spectacles in a light shade of pink. Even those blue eyes, the eyes Archie had been so excited about, lasted 2 weeks only. She had been born with them, yes, but one day Clara looked again, and there were brown eyes staring up at her, like the transition between a closed bud and an open flower, the exact moment of which the naked, waiting eye can never detect. And this belief in her ugliness, in her wrongness, had subdued her. She kept her smart-ass comments to herself these days, kept her right hand on her stomach. She was all wrong. This is another image that Smith uses is Irie is very insecure about her weight, and a way that she does it is that Smith portrays this is constantly having Irie like holding her stomach, which I think is like that tactile description is just genius and just really puts you into it, and you can kind of feel it. You can feel it physically when you read it, and just an excellent approach. And skipping only a couple of pages forward, so the teacher, Mrs. Rudy, has criticized her for being for not focusing in class, and then now they're talking about does anyone else have anything to add about the sonnets? We're talking about one of the sonnets. I can't remember which one, but it doesn't really matter. All right then, have you anything to say about the sonnets? Yes. What? Is she black? Is who black? The dark lady. No, dear, she's dark. She's not black in the common sense. There weren't any, Afro-Caribbeans in England at that time. That's more of a modern phenomenon. And I'm sure you know, this was the 1600s. I mean, I can't be sure, but it does seem terribly unlikely, unless she was a slave of some kind. And he's unlikely to have written a series of sonnets to a lord and then a slave, is he? Irie reddened. She had thought just then that she had seen something like a reflection, but it was receding, so she said, "Don't know, miss." Oh god, that receding a reflection. Oh shit. Besides, he says very clearly, "In nothing art thou black, save in thy deeds." No, dear, she just has a dark complexion, you see, as dark as mine, probably. Irie looked at Miss Rudy. She was the colour of strawberry mousse. You see, Joshua is quite right. The preference was for women to be excessively pale in those days. The sonnet is about a debate between her natural colouring and the makeup that was the fashion of the time. I just thought, this is, I believe, Irie speaking, I just thought, like when he says, "Here, then will I swear beauty herself is black, and the curly hair thing black wires," Irie gave up in the face of giggling and shrugged. No, dear, you're reading it with a modern ear. Never read what is old with a modern ear. In fact, that will serve as today's principle. Can you all write that down, please? And a really, really touching and important critique or commentary on this idea of excluding the great literature from Black African American and the Jamaican immigrants, of which Irie is a part. Her mother is Jamaican. Okay, about damn time I talk about the Chalfins. So Irie and Millet get in trouble for smoking weed, allegedly, with Joshua Chalfin, and their punishment is to go to the Chalfin house to just do some studying after school. And when they go there, they start to realize that this is a really unique house, and it's a very progressive, enlightened house. I think actually James Wood, the critic from that I mentioned like 6 jillion minutes ago, he has a great description of them where he talks about how they were so liberal that they could not comprehend the idea of ever being wrong about anything. And they have a openness that really eventually begins to manifest in this sort of blind sight. So, for example, they talk about when Marcus, the father, Marcus Chalfin, who is married to Joyce Chalfin, when Marcus sees Irie, he just says, "You are a big girl," and she's just like, thanks. And then he's like, "We like that around here. A healthy eater. All Chalfins are healthy eaters. I don't put on a pound, but Joyce does. In the right places, naturally. You're staying for dinner?" And then she's sort of, shocked a little bit. And then later on, one of the Chalfin kids is sort of shocked, or not shocked, but is just sort of like just being rowdy and being a little kid. And then Joyce, the mother, is talking about how he finds brown strangers really fascinating, and it's just this thing. It's this attitude that that the people who have it probably think it comes across as being very enlightened, but it is actually this sort of like kind of pushing boundaries almost, and not being willing to respect it. And even within this whole section of introducing the Chalfins is really great, because the Chalfins are very, the parents, they're very physically intimate. And so Irie, and Smith writes, Irie thought of her own parents, whose touches were now virtual, existing only in the absences where both sets of fingers had previously been: the remote control, the biscuit tin lid, the light switches. And yeah, this whole section is really great. But one of the starts is that seeing Millet, maybe it's unclear exactly why. I think she's just sort of, maybe she's physically attracted, but Joyce almost like falls in love with Millet, and it starts to sow a lot of discontent with Joshua Chalfin, the son, who eventually goes down his own extremist path. He ends up joining a radical vegan animal rights group that is kind of fighting against his father's Future Mouse project. It's this sort of genetic engineering that's really almost prophetic or prescient of a lot of the debates that we have about CRISPR nowadays. But it is again this idea of this so-called enlightened family where Joyce starts to neglect her actual kids because she becomes so enamored with Millet, but then it's also like, why is she enamored with him? Is it just a novelty thing? Does she actually really care? She obviously doesn't really care about her own kids, and it's a very well fleshed out dynamic that Smith has presented. And there are some slightly sinister things that show up. So yes, they talk about how they created this great environment. Joyce is a horticulturalist. She has like plants and stuff, and she's written books and been very popular. And Marcus, going on to make Future Mouse, is studying like biology and so on. And they talk about creating this great environment. But then she starts to put in these little things. Joyce says, after a while, you've got to suspect it's in the genes, haven't you? All these brains, nurture just won't explain it. Will it? And then Clara says, no, I guess not. And Joyce replies, now, out of interest, I really am curious. Which side do you think Irie gets it from? The Jamaican or the English? Oh, sorry, it was Clara saying that. So Joyce and Clara, the two mothers, are talking. And it's just this really like, did you really just ask me if you think I'm the smart mother, or if you think I'm the smart parent, or if you think Archie's the smart parent? It's this real kind of like blind sight that is so well described in this book, and we come up to it again. There's maybe a few more examples before I get to it, but later on, Samad really sort of feeling the weight of not feeling at home in England. He says, I sometimes wonder why I even bother, Samad said bitterly, betraying the English inflections of 20 years in the country. I really do. These days it feels to me like you make a devil's pact when you walk into this country. You hand over your passport at the check-in, you get stamped, you want to make a little money, get yourself started, but you mean to go back. Who would want to stay? Cold, wet, miserable. Terrible food, dreadful newspapers. Who would want to stay in a place where you were never welcomed, only tolerated, just tolerated, like you were an animal, finally house trained? Who would want to stay? But you have made a devil's pact. It drags you in, and suddenly you are unsuitable to return. Your children are unrecognizable. You belong nowhere. And then you begin to give up the very idea of belonging. Suddenly this belonging, it seems like a long, dirty lie. And I begin to believe that birthplaces are accidents, that everything is an accident. But if you believe that, where do you go? What do you do? What does anything matter? Oh yeah, this is a slight point before I go back to another Chalfen Blind site that is really powerful. The last section is Magid, Millet, and Marcus, and I just feel like it should have been Magid, Millet, and Joshua. That would have made more sense. It's a slight criticism, but whatever, because it's all the epigraph. I guess is talking about what makes like defining fundamentalism, and it would have made a lot more sense. So. I've already talked about Millet and Joshua's fundamentalism. Millet joining the Islamic fundamentalist group or extremist group, Kevin. Joshua eventually joining Fate, the animal rights group. Magid was a complete failure in Samad's desire to send him back to become a good Muslim. When he's there's an accident, like an earthquake, and a statue falls and breaks his nose, and so he ends up getting a Roman nose, and Magid decides that, this is unacceptable. The country shouldn't be set up in such a way that these accidents can happen. I'm going to study law. I'm going to become a lawyer. And he becomes even more secular, even more devoted to just, even further estranged from religion. He and Magid ends up getting a correspondence with Marcus, the father who's working on Future Mouse. They believe that it's a very good thing. They think their intelligence and their sentimentalities align, and it's actually Marcus who ends up getting the money, the funds together to fly Magid back. When Marcus goes to pick up Magid because it all lined up that no one else could go and it had to be Marcus. They finally meet, and I'll read this. So this is first Marcus talking. Yes, Magid, we finally meet. I feel as if I know you already. Well, I do, but then again I don't. But bloody hell, how did you know it was me? Magid's face grew radiant and revealed a lopsided smile of much angelic charm. Well, Marcus, my dear man, you're the only white fellow at gate 32. And that sums up, it jumps to a different kind of section or chapter, and I thought that was a really brilliant way of describing some of the luxuries that, white people have when you're in a predominantly white country of, you can read that a couple of ways, because you can at first think that Marcus is transcending race and he's seeing Magid for the virtues that he has, being such an intelligent and erudite person, being so disciplined, and so on and so forth, that he didn't even notice. He wasn't looking at anybody else's race. However, you could also maybe think of it as Marcus being in a predominantly white country is at the luxury of not noticing race. However, for someone like Magid, an immigrant, you would never ever not know if you were the only immigrant in a room. Like, that thing is just, you would never not be aware of that. And I think that ending, the ending of that chapter captures that idea perfectly. And so actually, I think that's all I wanted to say. There are, I already talked about how the end was sort of a little bit whatever. Basically, in terms of plot, you might know that everyone just sort of gets together. There is this almost like showdown where every single extremist group is showing up to this Future Mouse event, and it's not the strongest thing. There are some more really good developments. We come back to Mo, who was the one who saved Archie. He's another one who joined the fundamentalist group, and he tells these really kind of heartbreaking stories about, like, the thing that brought him to it was violence. Like, it was just the fact that he would constantly get harassed. His store would be broken into, it'd be robbed. He would report robberies, and then policemen would come and beat the shit out of him. And it's just like, like really stomach sinking to read, and you're just like, oh, but they're also like, you know, kind of sort of terrorists, but you can't deny that they've been through like these terrible things, and you can see why it led them to it. Needless to say, regardless of the fact that even Zadie Smith herself has talked about how there is some amateurship in the book, and I do get that she sort of, as she went on to write, she probably, or as she got older as a writer, she probably didn't feel the need to do so much telling and just showing. I still think this is an immensely good book, and I think that you should really read it. It's a very strong debut. I know this is a long as hell video, but this book was a really big deal. I did want to remake the video to actually talk about, because I missed out on so many things. I have NW. That's the next Zadie Smith book that I think I will read. I don't have anything else by her. Let me know what you think of her other books. Let me know if there are some non-fiction, because I know she's written some essays, and also with her husband. Yeah, thanks for watching. If you've gotten this far, you're pretty damn cool. And I'll see you in the next video, which I'm sure is going to be shorter than this.